Her fragrance ended the execution. The Alpha King snapped his chains and thundered, "Let my queen go." The cold wind swept through the jagged cliffs of the Darkreach kingdom, carrying with it the scent of rain, iron, and something faintly sweet that teased the senses. Below the crumbling stones of the old fortress, a crowd had gathered, their faces pale in fear and anticipation. They whispered rumors of a young princess, a captive who had been brought from a distant land, her life hanging by a thread only the Alpha King could decide to cut or save. Princess Ilaria stood atop the wooden platform, her hands bound with silver chains that glinted under the stormy sky. Her dress, once white, was smeared with mud and the dust of the journey that had brought her here. Yet despite the grime and the threat of death, she carried herself with a regal dignity, her chin lifted and her eyes steady, even as the soldiers muttered darkly behind her. It was said that her fragrance was otherworldly, a scent that could make the hardest men falter and the cruelest hearts waver. But no one in the crowd dared speak it aloud, for fear of drawing the Alpha King's wrath. Only Kaelin, ruler of Darkreach, stood silently atop the highest balcony, observing her with eyes as sharp and black as obsidian. Kaelin was a man of legend. His power was whispered in the villages and castles alike. He had once been a king among men, yet a curse had made him something more, something feared even by those who served him. Rumor had it that he had never loved, for love could bring weakness, and weakness could destroy kingdoms. But when he saw Ilaria, standing alone under the storm-laden sky, there was a stir inside him that no sword, no magic, and no battle had ever caused. The princess's hair, dark as midnight, whipped around her face in the wind, and her eyes, a piercing shade of violet, met Kaelin's gaze without flinching. The crowd gasped at the boldness of her stare, for none had dared meet the Alpha King's eyes before. Even the executioner, a hulking man with a grim face, paused, the axe trembling slightly in his hands. Ilaria's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a strange mix of anticipation and defiance. She had been trained for moments like this, not to beg, not to cry, but to stand like a flame in the dark, bright enough to be seen but untouchable. Yet even she could not ignore the strange pull she felt toward the man above her. Something in his eyes, dark as a storm cloud yet bright with unspoken fire, made her pulse quicken. The crowd murmured as Kaelin descended from the balcony. Each step he took made the ground seem to tremble beneath him. His presence was overwhelming, not just for the sheer force of his power, but because of the strange, magnetic pull he seemed to radiate. He stopped a few feet from the platform, his gaze locked on Ilaria, and the storm around them seemed to respond. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled across the mountains, and rain began to fall in sheets. "You are far from home, princess," Kaelin said, his voice deep, commanding, yet with an edge of curiosity. "Do you understand why you are here?" Ilaria's lips pressed into a thin line, her voice steady. "I am here because you believe I threaten your kingdom. I do not." Kaelin's eyes narrowed, as if weighing her words against some hidden truth. "Threats come in many forms," he said. "Some are obvious and some hide behind beauty, behind charm, behind scent." Ilaria's heart skipped. She had not spoken a word about her gift, the subtle magic that ran through her veins, the magic that caused those around her to hesitate, to falter, to feel emotions they could not control. It had been with her since birth, and it was as much a part of her as her hair or her eyes. Yet to hear it named aloud by the Alpha King, so directly, sent a shiver down her spine. "I am no threat," she whispered, though her voice carried across the platform. "I have never harmed anyone." Kaelin took another step forward, his black cloak billowing behind him like shadowed wings. "And yet, here you stand with chains around your wrists, ready for execution. Perhaps the harm is not what you do, but what you awaken." The crowd gasped again. The air felt heavy, charged with the tension of what might come next. Even the soldiers shifted uneasily, sensing that this was no ordinary moment of judgment. There was something electric between the Alpha King and the princess, a dangerous, magnetic tension that made it impossible to look away. Ilaria held her ground, though her pulse raced. She could sense the raw, unbridled power in Kaelin, and yet there was something else, something hidden behind the armor of darkness he wore. It was a loneliness, a vulnerability that no one else had ever glimpsed, and for a brief, terrifying moment she felt pity, then anger. Anger that this man, for all his strength and legend, had never known the warmth of trust, the softness of love. The executioner lifted the axe, the blade catching the gray light of the storm. Ilaria closed her eyes, preparing herself. She had faced death before in distant lands on distant battlefields, yet never like this, never with the eyes of a king, of a man who could destroy her with a thought upon her. Then came the sound that made everyone stop. Chains rattled behind Kaelin. His hands, once bound by his own self-imposed control, had broken free, the very metal bending and snapping as if it were nothing. Kaelin's chest heaved with a roar that seemed to shake the heavens, and his black eyes blazed with a power that none had dared witness. "Let her go," he thundered, his voice splitting the storm. Lightning struck so close to the platform that the crowd screamed and fell back, yet the princess stood firm, stunned and awed. The executioner froze, unable to move, the axe slipping from his grasp. The air itself seemed to hum, vibrating with energy, as if the storm answered the Alpha King's command. Rain whipped around them, soaking hair and garments, yet Kaelin seemed untouched, standing like a pillar of darkness and light. Ilaria felt her own breath catch, her heart hammering not with fear but with a strange, overwhelming relief. Kaelin's gaze fell on her again, softer now, yet no less intense. Your scent, your presence, it calls to something in me I thought long dead." His voice was barely more than a growl, yet it resonated in her bones. "I will not let you die, not by their hands, not by anyone's." Ilaria's eyes widened. She had expected cruelty, violence, perhaps even death. But what she did not expect was the raw, unrestrained devotion, the fire that had been unleashed within a man who had never known love, never allowed himself to feel. The crowd was silent, some too terrified to breathe, others whispering prayers under their breath. This was no ordinary king, no ordinary rescue. It was the stirrings of a power older than the kingdom itself, older than the mountains and the storms. And in that moment, Ilaria felt something she had never felt before, hope. Kaelin extended his hand toward her, not in command but as an offer, a bridge across the chasm of fear and mistrust. "Take my hand," he said, voice now softer, almost reverent. "You are not mine to take, but I cannot let harm come to you." Ilaria hesitated for a heartbeat, then reached out, feeling the warmth of his hand, the strength that radiated from him, and the storm seemed to bow around them. Chains of steel had been broken, chains of fear had begun to crumble, and a new, fragile bond had formed in the heart of the storm. The executioner, pale and trembling, stepped back. Soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure what to do, for the Alpha King's fury and his devotion had combined into something unstoppable. The crowd parted instinctively, leaving a space charged with magic, emotion, and something ancient, almost sacred. Kaelin lifted Ilaria from the platform, holding her close yet without constriction, as if he feared she might vanish like the wind itself. And in that embrace, brief as it was, they felt the first stirrings of something neither had anticipated, the beginnings of trust, of longing, of a connection that could either heal them or consume them entirely. As the storm raged around them, Kaelin turned his gaze to the horizon, eyes narrowed, jaw set. There were threats to his kingdom, enemies that whispered in the shadows, and a curse upon his bloodline that had lasted generations. But for the first time, none of that mattered. What mattered was the princess in his arms, and the strange, intoxicating fragrance that had changed everything. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying the scent of rain and earth and something uniquely hers. And as lightning split the sky, Ilaria and Kaelin stood together, two souls bound by fate, power, and something neither fully understood yet, a dangerous, beautiful beginning. And far below, the crowd whispered in awe and fear, uncertain whether they had just witnessed death averted or the birth of a legend. The sky trembled, the storm refused to fade, and Kaelin's voice rang out once more. I swear, if anyone dares harm you, they will answer to me. No chain, no blade, no curse will touch you again. Ilaria's heart raced. She did not yet know what the future held or what this storm between them would demand. But she knew one thing. Her life had changed forever, and the path ahead would be one of danger, desire, and a love neither of them could yet fully name. And so, as the rain poured and thunder shook the mountains, the Alpha King had broken his chains, and the princess had survived, but the story had only just begun. The storm had passed, leaving the Darkreach fortress cloaked in mist, with rain dripping from the black stones like tears of the heavens themselves. Inside, the halls smelled of wet stone, smoke from torches, and a faint trace of the forest outside. Princess Ilaria followed the Alpha King Kaelin through the corridors, her hands still trembling from the terror and awe of what had just happened. Though he had saved her life, she could not ignore the sense of power he radiated, a power so fierce it made the blood in her veins quiver. Kaelin moved like a shadow through the fortress, each step precise, commanding, yet somehow quiet. Ilaria noticed the way his eyes flicked to the walls, to the guards, to the hidden corners of the castle. Everything was under his control, yet there was a restlessness in him, a storm within that mirrored the one outside. She wondered, not for the first time, if even he could calm it. You are safe for now, Kaelin said, his voice low, almost a growl, yet softened by the memory of the platform and her gaze. But this place is not kind, and neither are all who dwell within it. Ilaria nodded, her gaze sweeping the cold, shadowed hallways. I understand, she said, trying to sound composed, though a shiver ran down her spine. But why save me? Why not let the execution happen? Kaelin paused at a balcony overlooking the inner courtyard. Rain had left pools of water on the stones, reflecting the gray sky. He stared into them as if seeing something only he could perceive. Because, he said finally, you are different. Most fear me, most obey, most would beg for mercy. But you awakened something in me that I thought lost forever. Ilaria tilted her head, studying him. What is it you thought lost? Kaelin's eyes darkened, and he turned away, walking swiftly down the corridor. Something that makes a man human. Something he cannot command or destroy. Something he cannot hide, even from himself. They arrived at a chamber deep within the fortress, a room lit by torches and lined with ancient tapestries that seemed to whisper of battles and kings long gone. Kaelin gestured for Ilaria to sit. She obeyed, noticing that the chains around her wrists had been removed, though her pulse still raced. You must know, Kaelin said, finally looking at her directly, that I am not like other men. I am bound by a curse older than this kingdom. I have lived centuries, not all in my own time. Love, trust, companionship, these are dangers to me. They weaken what I am. And yet you stand here unafraid, and something in me answers to you. Ilaria's heart beat faster. There was sadness in his words, a heavy weight of centuries of solitude. She had known kings, lords, and men of power, but none had carried the burden of immortality and curse like this. And yet beneath the power, beneath the fury and the fearsome reputation, there was a vulnerability that called to her. I do not fear you, she said softly, because I see beyond the power. I see the man who is trapped, and I believe there is more to him than chains and curses. Kaelin's eyes narrowed as if trying to read her soul. And if you are wrong, he asked, if what you see is only an illusion and I am as dangerous as everyone says, Ilaria met his gaze steadily. Then I will face the danger. I have faced danger before. I can face it again. A tension settled between them, heavy and electric, as if the room itself held its breath. Kalen took a step closer, the torchlight catching the sharp lines of his face, the intensity of his dark eyes. "You are unlike any I have ever known," he murmured, "and that terrifies me." Ilaria swallowed hard. She had felt fear before, yes, but never like this, fear tangled with fascination, with longing, with the sense that this man could destroy her or save her, perhaps in the same heartbeat. For days, Ilaria remained in the fortress, escorted but unbound, learning the ways of Kalen's domain. She saw the people who served him, their loyalty both earned and forced. She saw the soldiers who whispered behind closed doors, speaking of the princess and the strange effect she had on the Alpha King. And she saw Kalen, watching her, testing her, protecting her, yet struggling against the emotions he could not name. One evening she found herself alone in the library, a room filled with tomes of magic, history, and prophecy. Kalen entered silently, leaning against the doorframe. "Do you wish to see the truth?" he asked. Ilaria looked up, curious. "What truth?" He stepped closer, the air around him heavy with power. "The truth about me and why I am the way I am, the curse that binds me and the danger that comes with letting someone close." Ilaria's curiosity was stronger than her fear. "Tell me," she said. Kalen seated himself across from her, hands clasped. "Many years ago my family sought power beyond what men should have. A dark magic was invoked and it bound our line. We gained strength, longevity, and dominion, but at a cost. Love, trust, peace, these are fragile things, and the curse ensures I cannot fully know them without pain. Those who try often perish or they leave me broken. That is why I have never allowed anyone near." Ilaria felt a pang of sorrow. "But you saved me," she said, her voice soft, almost incredulous. "Even knowing this, you saved me. Why?" Kalen's gaze softened for the first time, and he reached for her hand, not with command, but with an offering. "Because you are different. You have fire and courage and something else, something I cannot explain. I could not let death touch you. Not yet. Perhaps, because in saving you, I also save a part of myself I thought lost." Ilaria's hand trembled under his, but she did not pull away. The room felt warmer, the shadows less threatening, and for a moment centuries of curse and power fell away, leaving only two hearts beating fiercely in the silence. Days passed, and their bond grew in subtle ways. A shared glance across the dining hall, a conversation in the gardens as the first sun after the storm warmed the stones, a hand brushing accidentally but deliberately across the other's palm. Each small gesture carried meaning, unspoken yet electric. Ilaria began to understand Kalen's moods, his silent torments, and the pride that fought against the tenderness growing within him. Kalen, in turn, found himself listening to her, laughing at her wit, feeling the stirrings of emotions he had long denied. Yet the tension remained. Kalen's curse and his past deeds were not easily set aside. There were nights when he would disappear, leaving Ilaria alone in her chambers, the walls echoing with whispers of danger, magic, and power. There were moments when he would return, and the storm in his eyes reminded her that he was as dangerous as he was alluring. And there were times when she caught herself longing for him, a longing that was both frightening and irresistible. One evening, as the sun set behind the fortress walls, painting the sky with gold and crimson, Kalen summoned Ilaria to the balcony overlooking the cliffs. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. He stood close yet did not touch her, the space between them charged with unspoken words. "You must understand," he said, voice low, "that I cannot promise safety forever. Enemies watch, curses linger, and my own heart is a battlefield." Ilaria met his gaze steadily. "Then we face it together," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Kalen's lips twitched in the ghost of a smile, a rare and dangerous thing. "You are fearless, yet brave is not always wise," he murmured. "But perhaps you are right. Perhaps some battles are worth the risk." The wind whipped around them, tossing their hair and garments, and in that moment the fortress seemed to fade away, leaving only two souls bound by fate, power, and the beginnings of something neither fully understood. Suddenly, a messenger arrived, breathless, bearing news from the northern lands. His words struck like a knife. A neighboring kingdom had heard of the princess's capture and was preparing to march. Their army, large and merciless, would arrive within days. Kaelin's eyes darkened. "So the storm grows," he said, jaw tightening. "And we are not yet ready, not yet." Illyria's heart pounded. "Then we must prepare," she said. "Together." Kaelin's gaze softened, lingering on her face. "Together," he repeated, the word heavy with meaning. "But know this, whatever comes, I will protect you, even if it destroys me." Illyria felt a shiver, not from the cold but from the intensity of his words, the promise that was both terrifying and comforting. She knew then that their fates were intertwined, that love and danger, desire and duty, would shape the days ahead. And she knew, too, that nothing would ever be the same again. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the fortress cast long shadows across the cliffs, and Kaelin and Illyria stood side by side, watching the sky bleed into night. The world outside was dangerous, cursed, and uncertain. Yet in that moment, they found a fragile sanctuary in one another, a spark of hope in a world ruled by power, fear, and fate. And far below, the lands whispered of a storm yet to come, of kings and armies, curses and magic, and of a bond between a princess and an alpha king that could change the course of kingdoms. The fortress of Darkreach seemed quieter than usual, but the silence was deceptive. Kaelin stood at the highest tower, staring at the northern horizon where dark clouds gathered like a warning. The distant lands of the neighboring kingdom had not waited for diplomacy. Their armies were on the move, marching through forests and mountains, carrying banners that promised war. Yet Kaelin's mind was not on the coming battle alone. His thoughts were tangled around Illyria, the princess who had turned his world upside down with a single glance, whose courage had awakened something within him that had been long buried. Illyria, meanwhile, was not idle. She had spent days studying maps, learning the lands, and understanding the magical wards that protected the fortress. Even as danger approached, she moved with a quiet determination, her violet eyes sharp with intelligence and focus. She had learned that Kaelin's curse was not merely a story told to frighten servants. It was real, woven into the very essence of his being, and it could be as dangerous to him as to anyone who tried to challenge him. "We cannot wait for them to strike," Illyria said as she joined him on the balcony. The wind tugged at her hair, whipping her cloak around her shoulders. "We must act before they reach the walls. If their army gathers strength, even your power may not be enough." Kaelin's jaw tightened. "And what do you propose?" he asked, his voice low and steady, betraying neither impatience nor surprise. "A battle outside the fortress, a duel in the shadowed forests. Those who come are strong, prepared, and merciless." Illyria met his gaze, unwavering. "Then we go to the forest. There is an artifact there, hidden for centuries, that may help you break part of your curse and strengthen your defenses. If we retrieve it before the enemy reaches the gates, we may have a chance to turn the tide." Kaelin studied her, searching for any hint of doubt, but there was none. She was calm, resolute, and unafraid of the dangers that lay ahead. "You would come with me?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "I will," she said simply. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The next day they departed, leaving the fortress behind. The forest stretched before them like a living maze, its trees twisted and tall, shadows pooling beneath the canopy as sunlight struggled to reach the ground. The air was thick with the scent of moss, earth, and rain that lingered from the storm. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, whispers of spirits or perhaps illusions conjured by the magic that lingered in the land. Kaelin moved silently ahead, a shadow among shadows. Illyria followed closely, noticing how his hand occasionally hovered near his sword, ready for any threat. Yet it was not just physical danger that he guarded against. Every glance, every gesture betrayed a war within him, the battle between his need to protect her and the fear of letting someone so close into his heart. As they walked deeper into the forest, the light dimmed, and the trees seemed to lean toward them, as if watching, judging, testing. Ilaria felt a thrill of fear, but it was tempered by determination. She knew that this journey was as much a test of their bond as it was of their courage. Suddenly, the forest shifted. Shadows moved unnaturally and the air became colder. Kalen stopped, placing a hand on Ilaria's shoulder. "We are not alone," he whispered. "This forest is alive. It tests those who enter. Be ready for illusions, for danger that preys on your mind, not your body." Ilaria nodded, steeling herself. "I am ready." The first test came swiftly. A figure appeared on the path ahead, a man cloaked in black, his face hidden, his movements eerily graceful. He spoke without sound, yet Ilaria understood him perfectly. "Turn back. Leave now. You are not meant to continue." Kalen's grip on his sword tightened. "Do not speak to them," he warned. "They are illusions meant to make us doubt ourselves." But the figure did more than speak. It shifted, becoming a mirror of Ilaria herself, her fears, her insecurities, her doubts, all reflected in a shadowy form. Ilaria faltered, the mirror version of herself pointing accusingly. "You are weak. You cannot protect him. You will fail." Kalen stepped forward, placing himself between the illusion and her. His voice was low, commanding. "You are strong. You are brave. And you are not alone. Look at me." Ilaria took a deep breath and focused on him, on the warmth and steadiness in his eyes. The illusion trembled and dissolved, leaving only the sound of the wind and their racing hearts. You saved me again," Ilaria whispered, her voice trembling with awe and something deeper, something unspoken. Kalen's expression softened for the briefest moment. "You saved me too," he said, almost under his breath. "From the darkness I thought I would always carry alone." They continued, moving cautiously through the forest, aware that each step brought new challenges. Shadows became beasts, and the wind carried whispers of memories long past. Kalen fought with skill and precision, his sword moving like lightning, but it was Ilaria's courage and insight that often guided him past traps that were invisible to the eye. Together, they became more than king and princess. They became a team, each protecting the other in ways that words could not capture. One night, as they made camp near a sparkling river that cut through the forest, Kalen and Ilaria sat near the fire. The flames reflected in their eyes, creating a warmth that contrasted with the cold and danger around them. "You are remarkable," Kalen said quietly, his gaze fixed on her. "Most would have fled, screamed, or broken long ago. Yet you endure and you challenge me, and you trust me even when you should fear me." Ilaria smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I endure because I must. And I trust you because I see that behind the fearsome power, there is a man who can choose to be better, who can choose to fight not just for himself, but for others." Kalen's hand hovered near hers, then retreated, as if the desire to reach out battled with the fear of letting his heart show too much. "And if I fail, if the curse overcomes me, or if our enemies strike," Ilaria reached for his hand, finally closing the distance. "Then we face it together. You do not carry this alone, not anymore." For a moment the world seemed to pause. The fire crackled, the river murmured, and the forest whispered around them. They were two souls bound by circumstance, power, and the beginning of something neither fully understood. Their hands met, tentative at first, then firmer, a promise in touch rather than words. But the forest had one final test. The next morning they encountered a clearing where the sunlight burned unnaturally bright, almost blinding. In the center lay a stone pedestal, and atop it rested the artifact they sought, a crystal imbued with ancient magic, glowing with a soft, pulsing light. Kalen approached it first, but the ground shook violently, and shadows rose from the earth, forming into monstrous shapes that lunged at them with teeth and claws made of darkness. Ilaria dodged and guided Kalen, using both her wits and her growing magical awareness to create openings. Kalen fought with unmatched strength, yet it was their unity, their trust in each other, that allowed them to survive. Finally, Ilaria reached the pedestal, lifting the crystal with care. Its light expanded, pushing back the shadows and bathing the clearing in a golden glow. Kalen stood beside her, his hand gripping hers, feeling the warmth of the artifact and the pulse of something ancient and powerful flowing through them. You did it, Kalen said, awe in his voice. You have saved us both again. Ilaria looked at him, her eyes shining with the reflection of the crystal. We saved each other, she corrected softly. The moment was brief, however. The forest rumbled, and a distant horn echoed through the trees. The enemy army had arrived sooner than expected. Their victory in the clearing had bought them little time. Kalen and Ilaria exchanged a glance, understanding the danger ahead, yet also feeling the unspoken bond that had deepened between them. As they mounted their horses and rode toward the fortress, the wind carried the scent of rain and earth once more, mingled with the lingering glow of the artifact. Their hands brushed once again, and for a fleeting heartbeat, they allowed themselves to feel the pull of something beyond survival, beyond duty, the fragile beginnings of love. Yet the forest behind them, though conquered for the moment, still whispered of dangers, illusions, and trials yet to come. And Kalen knew, as he guided Ilaria forward, that the next battle would test not only their strength, but the bond they had forged in the storm, in fire, and in shadows. They were no longer simply king and princess. They were partners, warriors, and something more. Two souls intertwined in a world where curses, armies, and ancient magic would stop at nothing to claim victory. And as the Darkreach fortress loomed ahead, mist curling around its towers like protective arms, Ilaria and Kalen rode together, ready to face whatever came next, their hearts beating in rhythm, their fates now inseparable, and the storm outside a mere echo of the storm. Within, the Darkreach fortress loomed ahead, tall and dark against the blood-red sky of dawn. Kalen and Ilaria rode hard through the morning mist, the weight of the artifact secured between them, the sounds of the approaching enemy army echoing through the valleys like distant thunder. Their hearts pounded not only with the urgency of survival, but with the unspoken bond that had grown between them over days of trials, fear, and quiet revelations. Kalen's eyes were sharp, scanning the cliffs and forests for ambushes. Every instinct honed over centuries, every lesson learned from war and betrayal guided him. Yet beneath the surface of vigilance, a deeper tension simmered, a fear of losing Ilaria, not only to the enemy but to the curse that haunted him. She had become more than a princess, more than a companion. She had become a part of him, the spark that could either save him or destroy him. Ilaria rode beside him, wind whipping her hair, cloak clinging to her shoulders. Despite exhaustion, she did not falter. Her eyes were bright, alert, scanning the land, anticipating the enemy's movements. She had learned Kalen's moods, his silences, and the way his hands moved when danger was near. She could almost sense the thoughts in his mind before he spoke them aloud, and she trusted him completely, a trust she had never offered lightly. As they approached the fortress gates, the enemy's army became visible, stretching across the plains like a dark wave. Thousands of soldiers, banners flapping in the wind, their march unbroken and relentless. The sight was enough to make any ordinary heart falter, but Kalen was no ordinary man, and Ilaria was no ordinary princess. Together, they were a force tempered by courage, strategy, and the quiet fire of connection that had grown between them. Kalen dismounted first, helping Ilaria to the ground with a strength both commanding and gentle. "We hold them here," he said, his voice low and steady. "We have the fortress, the walls, and the magic of this land on our side, but more than that, we have each other." Ilaria smiled faintly, a smile that carried warmth, defiance, and a hint of hope. "Then we will face them," she said, "together." The enemy reached the outer walls as the first rays of sunlight pierced the sky. Their horn blared, a sound meant to intimidate, but it only fueled Kaelin's determination. He moved along the battlements, issuing commands with precision, his presence inspiring loyalty and courage in the soldiers who had once feared him without question. But now they looked at him and Ilaria, seeing not only power but a force of purpose, a unity that could turn the tide of battle. Ilaria stayed close to him, her knowledge of the artifact and its magic guiding her. She realized that the crystal they had retrieved from the forest could amplify Kaelin's strength, but only if they acted in unison. The bond they had formed, trust, courage, and something deeper, almost like love, was key to harnessing its power. As the enemy forces surged forward, Kaelin raised his hands, calling on the ancient wards of the fortress. The walls glowed faintly, runes etched in stone coming alive with light. Arrows flew, soldiers clashed, and the first wave of enemies faltered under the fortress's magic. But the enemy was relentless, sending wave after wave of troops, each stronger and more determined than the last. Ilaria held the crystal high, feeling its warmth and power pulse through her. She realized that it responded not only to Kaelin's strength but to their bond. Their hearts beating together, their focus aligned, the artifact's light grew brighter, forming a shield around the fortress that pushed back the enemy, scattering shadows and steel alike. Kaelin's voice rang out over the chaos, commanding, yet filled with a note of emotion he rarely allowed anyone to hear. "Stand firm, fight with courage, protect what is ours." Ilaria felt his strength and determination wash over her, blending with her own. Together, they became more than a king and princess. They became a singular force, an unbreakable unit of strategy, courage, and the faint but undeniable magic of connection. Yet the enemy had not yet revealed their final strategy. From the rear of their army, a shadowed figure emerged, a warlord shrouded in black armor, wielding a sword of dark fire. He moved swiftly, almost as if he were gliding, a deadly predator among men. Kaelin recognized him immediately. This was no ordinary soldier, but a master of dark magic, a rival who had long sought to destroy him and claim the throne for himself. Kaelin's hand brushed Ilaria's as he moved closer. "Stay behind me," he said, voice low, tense. "This one will test us like never before." Ilaria nodded, her grip tightening on the crystal. "I will not leave your side," she said firmly. "Not now, not ever." The battle intensified. Arrows and spells flew through the air. Soldiers clashed with swords and shields, and the fortress itself seemed alive with the surge of magic. Kaelin and Ilaria moved as one, the crystal amplifying Kaelin's power while Ilaria directed its energy with precision. Each strike, each spell, each command perfectly timed. The enemy's front lines faltered, but the warlord advanced relentlessly, his sword slicing through the air with dark, crackling fire. Kaelin faced him directly, sword in hand, eyes locked on the enemy's. Their clash was fierce, sparks flying, the sound of metal ringing against magic. Ilaria's heart raced, not from fear, but from the intensity of watching him fight, from the knowledge that their lives, their bond, and the fate of the kingdom hung in the balance. "You will not take this land," Kaelin roared, his sword glowing with energy from the crystal. The warlord laughed, a sound that echoed like thunder. "It is already mine," he spat, striking again. Kaelin parried, feeling the weight of centuries of battles, of curses, of loneliness, and of the desire to protect something greater than himself. Ilaria stepped forward, focusing the crystal's light on the warlord. The glow wrapped around him, weakening his attacks, forcing him back, but he would not yield. Finally, Kaelin found an opening, striking with precision, channeling not only his strength but the power of the artifact, amplified by their trust and connection. The warlord staggered, the darkness of his magic recoiling under the combined force. He glared at them one last time before vanishing into a cloud of shadow and smoke, leaving the battlefield silent, save for the heavy breathing of exhausted soldiers and the distant echoes of the enemy retreat. Kaelin lowered his sword, chest heaving, eyes searching for Ilaria. She stood before him, glowing faintly in the morning light, the crystal in her hands, eyes wide but shining with determination and relief. Without thinking, Kalen drew her into his arms, holding her close, feeling her pulse, her warmth, and the undeniable connection that had grown through danger, fear, and countless trials. "You are alive," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "And we survived." Ilaria rested her head against his chest. "Yes," she whispered, "together we survived." For a long moment the fortress and the battlefield faded into shadows. There was only the warmth of each other, the knowledge that they had faced death, darkness, and despair, and had emerged stronger not just as warriors but as two hearts intertwined. Kalen pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. "I have lived centuries and I have never known this feeling," he confessed, his voice almost trembling. "I thought love was a weakness, that it would destroy me as it has destroyed so many. But with you I understand. It is not weakness. It is strength. A strength I cannot ignore." Ilaria's eyes glistened. "I never expected to find love here in the shadow of war and curses," she said softly. "But it is here with you, and I will not let it go." The sun climbed higher, bathing the fortress in golden light. Soldiers cheered, the enemy had retreated, and for the first time in many years, Kalen allowed himself to breathe, to feel, and to hope. The curse that had haunted him was not fully gone, but it had been challenged and weakened by something more powerful than any spell: trust, courage, and the unyielding bond of love. As they stood together on the battlements, hands intertwined, Kalen knew that the days ahead would bring new challenges, threats to the kingdom, whispers of betrayal, and the lingering shadow of the curse. But he also knew something stronger. With Ilaria by his side, he could face whatever came, not as a king alone, but as a man reborn through love, courage, and redemption. Ilaria leaned into him, her voice soft but steady. "We face the future together, no matter what it holds." Kalen pulled her close once more, feeling the warmth of her presence, the fragrance that had first caught him on the execution platform, and the strength of a love that had grown through fire and shadow. "Together," he said, voice resolute. "Forever." The fortress, the kingdom, and the skies above seemed to exhale, as if recognizing the triumph not of power alone, but of hearts that had dared to hope, to trust, and to love. And in that moment, the Alpha King and the princess, now his queen in all but name, stood together, a living legend, bound by courage, destiny, and a love that could withstand even the darkest of storms. The horizon glowed with the promise of dawn, of new beginnings, and of a kingdom that would remember this day for centuries. The day the Alpha King snapped his chains, defied fate, and claimed not only his queen but his own redemption.